How much do you think that the negative economic situation in Russia could be the determining factor for Russia's ability to sustain the war against Ukraine?
It's not going to get any better for Putin and for the armed forces. Unfortunately, the effect is not going to be that drastic because Russia is divided into two parts: everything war and the civil part of the economy. And the war is being financed, and they will continue financing it. It's the civil part of the economy. It's the society that suffers, and it'll be suffering more and more. I'll just give you an example. Schools are closing in Rostov province, schools and kindergartens, because they cannot pay the teachers any longer.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you. Season's greetings if you don't celebrate those holidays, but still looking forward to this two-part conversation with a regular friend of the channel, Konstantin Samoilov, host of Inside Russia YouTube channel. We're going to be splitting the conversation into a typical reflection of the Russian economy, the state of things going on in Russia, as Konstantin does weekly. But then part two, a sort of forecasting, forward-looking assessment of what we might expect for 2026. And some key insights there. So do make sure you're subscribed and stick around to both of us to make sure you don't miss out on those videos. But Konstantin, it's always a pleasure to have you. I'm very glad that we've started making these a monthly fixture. I've done a fair amount of coverage on the economy myself in recent days, something that I'm calling the triple header, in the sense that three different things are coming to a head. On the one hand, you've got obviously decreasing oil revenue at $35 a barrel, or even 30 in some cases. But then, of course, the federal budget. The federal budget is looking incredibly unhealthy as well, unsustainable, lack of revenue being made internally because of those oil prices. But thirdly, the monetary policy. You've got sticky inflation and a lack of economic growth. So either persistent inflation or potential economic stagnation. Anyway, that's a sort of little bit of a framing, but I wanted to hear from you very, very quickly in the past few weeks what you've been looking at and what do you think are the biggest tells of the state of the Russian economy?
Pyotr, Merry Christmas to you. Everyone watching, Merry Christmas. It is a pleasure. Let's do another monthly economic review of Russia. You had a good start there, in the right direction. But you weren't comprehensive. You just named three things, major things, but not all of them. There are many more. And, what you said, it shouldn't come to a surprise to anyone who studies, who monitors the state of economic things in Russia. And I am absolutely sure it's not a surprise to you because we've spoken so much about that. So you are well aware of what's going on. You mentioned these three things, but then let's add another thing, the biggest thing that is basically ruining Russian economy. That is the elephant in the room that not too many people in the West are talking about. That's the war spendings. They are astronomical, absolutely astronomical. And they're sucking money in from everything else and throw them to produce more drones, more shells, more tanks, more planes. Everything that sends death to Ukrainians, everything that flies or makes its way to Ukraine and blows up, so it doesn't add any weight, any value to the economy, only adds tragedy to humans. So war spendings, more and more Russians are leaving Russia, and not the retirees, not students. It's young adults, those who have enough courage, enough skills, ability to learn, enough energy, and enough brain to foresee what's coming to Russia. More and more Russians leave. There was a big wave of there was exodus of Russia from Russia back in 2022. Myself witnessed it. I'm a part of it. And then Russians slowed down leaving the country, but then this process is intensifying now, and I'm seeing more and more people leaving now, because before they were running from the war, from the oppression. Now a lot start running from the economic demise they're seeing. A lot of people closing down their businesses, small businesses, and they basically have nothing to do in Russia. They leave and search their luck in foreign lands. Unemployment, don't forget unemployment. It was low, but now it starts rising because layoffs are intensifying. Another huge elephant in the room no one in the West talks about is non-payment crisis. That's when large state-owned corporations simply don't pay for products delivered or services supplied because they can, because they don't have money, because no one can take them to court, and there's a huge crisis. It's being addressed right now by the government because they're afraid of this. Now, don't forget about the banking crisis, the rate of the number of defaults, both personal and corporate defaults, like a wave rising. That's just I'm getting started. That's on top of what you said. That's what's happening in Russia right now. Now, for 3.5 years, I've been talking about the economic tsunami. That's the term I coined. And it's like this unstoppable force. It's there, it's coming, and there's nothing you can do about that. You can just run. Well, it's came. It's in Russia. It's sinking everyone. It's making its way through and just destroying everything. That's what Russia at the end of 2025 looks like. You're absolutely right. The oil revenues are down 22% just from last month. The Indians have slowed down greatly buying Russian oil. The Chinese have nearly stopped. Quite a few Russian tankers full of oil circling in the sea, and they have no port to unload their oil at. The latest. Now, unfortunately, I can't confirm it. I just heard that number yesterday. $6 per barrel. That's how much Russian oil is sold right now at this moment. 26 with the cost of full cycle production over 30.
Well, yeah. I initially started because I was just laying out 3 or 4 key elements to the rate of which the Russian economy is obviously everything is colliding at once, right? If you had one of these issues, it wouldn't be exactly great for any economy. But for
yes, that's right. I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt, but you are so right here, Pyotr. If one of those things in a normal economy occurs, that's a crisis. And the government applies so many policies to fight this crisis. But what's happening in Russia, it's a perfect storm of everything that could happen has happened. Okay, so please forgive me for interrupting. I usually don't do that.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the point here is that this is a collision of so many different but crucial elements colliding at once, a perfect storm of economic turmoil or economic challenges, which the Russian government, the central bank, the State Duma doesn't have the capacity to maneuver out of. If it was just one of these things, then they could maybe tweak, I don't know, if it was the fiscal budget, then maybe they can tweak the money supply or do something with the monetary policy. But because you've got challenges with the monetary policy as well, that's squeezing the fiscal budget or the fiscal policy. And then that's let alone being able to rely on exports, becoming an export-led economy or something or whatever. So yeah, Russia's in a real rock and a hard place. But I think what I'm interested to hear from you a bit more is sort of what impacts can that mean over the short to medium term? The Russians have obviously been trying to sell more and more oil to other vendors, other buyers. But if people are wary of secondary sanctions like India and China, and they're not going to buy oil, who's left to be willing to buy that oil?
Not too many customers. A few months ago, the breakdown for Russian oil exports was the following. India was number 1, 1.5 million gallons per barrels per day it was buying from Russia. Then the second was China, a little over 1 million, and the rest were 900,000 barrels. Now, India, I don't have the numbers on the other end, on the Indian and the Chinese end, how much they are importing now, but all I know is that Russian oil revenues have landslided by 22% just from the last month. It just tells us that the Indians do not buy as much and the Chinese have nearly stopped. The problem was that is the 2 companies that export oil, mostly all oil, are Rosneft and Lukoil. and the direct sanctions were placed on them by Donald Trump, and that was it. The end of Russian oil, kaput. Now, of course, the Russian companies are trying to circumvent. They're trying to establish small companies, LLCs all over the world, in Southeast Asia, in China, and somehow funnel oil through them. But you know what? It doesn't work in large quantities. You can't do that. It makes your logistics much higher. You can't move as much oil through these companies. Otherwise, they will pop up on the radar, and the risks are too high for the buyers. They'd rather buy oil from other countries. And there's plenty of oil right now. That's another thing that is killing Russia. This overstocking of oil, a great overstocking. There's more oil supplied than demanded. That's why the global prices are falling down. So I know that's a fact that 4 largest oil refineries with state ownership in India have refused to buy Russian oil altogether. And that's a huge blow. Major customers for Rosneft. I know that the Chinese have refused buying Russian oil, and the Turkish have gradually decreased the importing of Russian oil. Unfortunately, I don't remember the numbers off my head. I think it was 600,000 barrels in the beginning of the year. Now it's either 2 or 400,000 barrels per day. But then I talked about it in details in one of my economic reviews, I think 2 weeks ago. But all I know is that I can tell you for sure is that the third major buyer of Russian oil, Turkey, has decreased almost by 50% in just 9 months. So who is left to buy Russian oil? Small importers, large companies that resell Russian oil. And the thing is, Russia doesn't have any major buyers besides India, China, and Turkey. And that's a catastrophe for the country whose well-being depends on oil, has depended on oil for the past 50 years.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely untenable, to be honest with you, isn't it? And one of the things I was also thinking about is just the economic geography of this. Putin often likes to tout the sheer size and scale of Russia, but one of its biggest issues is that he's spending so much of his money and focus on a pointless war and not putting that towards upscaling and improving the infrastructure and economic conditions of Russia. And this could obviously be in the form of better infrastructure and transport links and such for energy, for, making more use of the abundancy of resources that Russia has, which could make the country even wealthier. But he's not doing that. And so not only are we seeing a reduction in the overall demand and price level of oil, but we're also seeing Russia's inability to sustain its own supply, because at the end of the day, you have to keep the oil going. Otherwise, it will freeze, won't it? It's not, you can't just leave it static. So what do you think that means over the coming winter?
I'm confused because I think there's a big catastrophe for the oil industry, and it looks like they will have to start closing down wells. It happened on mass scale in early 90s. And it took Russia a couple decades to rebound. I don't see any other solution if it exports less and less, and the trend continues. If no miracle happens in the next couple months, and then they start buying more Russian oil, which I don't foresee, they will have to do something radical inside the industry, and I only see is closing down the wells. That's as much as I can tell you. I'm very confused about that. I don't know what to say more.
No, it's just the practical side of it, right? It's just you constantly have to keep it in motion. You have to keep them on.
It's a flow. You have to have flow. Natural gas, it's fairly understood how they're doing it. There are fields and fields of the flames near St. Petersburg. They're just burning natural gas into atmosphere because they cannot sell it. They cannot transport it to Europe any longer. So they just burn it. But you cannot burn oil like that.
No, it's not. It's not sustainable, is it? The other thing also is the just impact of the tech available because Russia's been sanctioned so much. A lot of the components or know-how of how to update the systems and maintain them has been affected as well, right? So that's going to compound. I think that's the key word I'm looking for. All this is going to be compounding, especially over the winter, and it's going to be very fascinating to see the conditions of things in the spring, let alone from the military standpoint. And that kind of brings me back to another question, which we've touched upon, but as these developments occur, Konstantin, how much do you think that the negative economic situation in Russia could be the determining factor for Russia's ability to sustain the war against Ukraine?
It's not going to get any better for Putin and for the armed forces. Unfortunately, the effect is not going to be that drastic because Russia is divided into two parts: everything war and the civil part of the economy. And the war is being financed, and they will continue financing it. It's the civil part of the economy. It's the society that suffers, and it'll be suffering more and more. I'll just give you an example. Schools are closing in Rostov province, schools and kindergartens, because they cannot pay the teachers any longer. Now, of course, they could spare some money and allocate from the military-industrial complex to pay teachers. Well, they don't do that, and they will not do that because to Putin, continuing the war is survival. So do not count on Russia drastically spending less on the military-industrial complex on the war. A good example, they have greatly decreased sign-up bonuses for signing military contracts for volunteers to go and fight in Ukraine. You know, most of provinces have cut the bonuses by 10 times, 8 to 10 times. That's huge. Used to be 4 million, now it's 400,000 rubles, you know. It doesn't mean that the federal sign-up bonus has been slashed. No, it's still the same. It's the provinces, because the sign-up bonus consists of two parts. One part is paid by the federal government, which is unchanged, and another part is paid by the state, the province governments. And they have stopped paying or greatly reduced paying, okay? Well, it doesn't mean that fewer Russians join the army right now. It only means that they started mobilizing the active reservists. That's all. There's still a supply of people. It's just a different kind of supply. And yes, this is a very unpopular measure in Russia, and they had been trying to avoid it at all costs. They had money, they were flooding people with money. Okay, but now they ran out of money. They said, okay, you know what? We're going to grab you by force and send you to Ukraine. So yes, things have changed. They have run out of money, but they still have supply of Russian men going to Ukraine. Just an example. So the war will go on.
Yeah. And what about, therefore, the internal dynamics of the Kremlin? I've been seeing a lot of rumblings, you know, from the elites, the shifting of gold and the fact that more wealthy Russians or the oligarchy types are buying up gold that the Russian government is trying to move because they need money. So clearly the elites in Russia are hedging and don't exactly have the biggest confidence in the direction of the war and the state of the economy.
The situation inside the Russian political landscape has not become any more stable. I'll put it like this. Things are definitely getting rockier. But what you are hearing, the rumbling of the elites, that's just noise. Disregard it. Because real fight is happening deep behind the curtains. You will not hear about that. If you hear some oligarch rumbling, that means that he's made a mistake or he does that on purpose. Because if the KGB Putin, the chief of staff office, hear an oligarch or official rumbling, they're going to take care of that person, because rumbling is showing disloyalty in Putin's system. And so everyone keeps their mouths shut. Okay, it's what you look for is signs of political war that is happening. Now I'll just give you a couple examples. The former commander-in-chief of land forces of Russian Federation, one of Russia's top-ranked generals, highest ranked generals, gave an interview, and he blamed the intelligence community, the intelligence service, for providing Putin the false information about the situation in Ukraine. Based on that false information, wrong decision was made to attack Ukraine, and Ukraine shouldn't have been attacked. That's what he said. And he blamed Shoigu for failures of Russian army. Okay? That hasn't happened before. Why? One of Russia's highest ranked generals, who had the highest honor, he was the commander of the V-Day parade on 2013. You can't get any higher than that in military ranks, you know? You're next after Putin. Why would he say anything like that? Now, that's a sign that there is a war going on between the KGB. He basically blamed the KGB for failing, providing information and lying to Putin and everyone else, right? So why would he do that? There's a war going on. And that is one of the moves that was made. Now, what about the bombings of different officials? A car was blown up, and another general was killed 2 days ago in Moscow. Well, you know what? Somehow it's the third general in a similar situation, and the KGB is responsible for providing security to the generals. So the KGB has failed miserably for the third time. And yet no one really asks questions, the KGB. Like, why did you allow that to happen? Well, perhaps wasn't the Ukrainians, okay? So things like that. Look for this small, tiny signs that show us huge struggle behind the curtains. It's like Sir Winston Churchill said that Russia is like bulldogs fighting underneath the carpet. We know they're there, but we have no clue what's going on. Once in a while, you get a sign of that fight. And if you have a few signs, you can link them together and then draw a bigger picture. So what I understand is there is a war going on between the power agencies right now. The KGB is becoming very powerful because every single week we are seeing dozens of arrests of Russian officials. Members of the United Russia Party, that's the Communist Party of the USSR, the equivalent, okay? That didn't happen before, and it's not supposed to happen in Putin's political system because those people are untouchable. The only people who can displace them are those who placed them in the first place, and that's the chief of staff of president's office. Okay? And the KGB takes, well, it doesn't coordinate its sections, it just massively arrests officials. And it replaces them with their own people. Now, Pyotr, that is the political fight, political war that is out of control because KGB is becoming too strong. And from what I hear, my sources, the inside sources, say that people at the chief of staff office are in panic. They don't know what to do because, you know, they're clearly losing this war. They were all powerful. Now KGB is closing on them, and Putin doesn't do anything because, you know what? I think at this point, KGB, he's afraid of them because they're becoming too strong. He needs strong KGB to oppress people, to oppress political opposition, but that's a trap. If the KGB becomes too big, then it doesn't need Putin. It just tells Putin what to do, and then he must listen. Death of Putin's system coming, okay? It will come from inside the corridors in the Kremlin, not from the front lines, okay? Economy is contributing a great deal because it's all about the money. It's all about the resources, and the pie is shrinking a great deal. And now it's shrinking catastrophically fast. And it's not enough for everyone, for the officials, for the siloviki to feast of it. The fight for the resources, for the money is becoming fight for life, basically, you know. So this is where real interesting story develops. And of course, economy will be, I'm trying to do the end of the year live stream, big video in my channel. And I'm just analyzing 2025 at a glance. And things are actually much worse than I forecasted a year ago. I thought it wouldn't be. I have hard time understanding the depth of tragedy of next year. Things are very bad, but that's tragedy of people. I'm in touch with regular people on a daily basis, and wow, let me tell you, that's things are so bad there. It's worse than in the 90s in some areas. But economy is definitely area of life to watch. But you know what? Much more interesting to watch will be what's happening inside the corridors of power in the Kremlin. That's going to be the grand show. I have my popcorn, and boy, every single time someone wins, someone loses, I'll be celebrating because they're rocking the boat more and more themselves.
Well, sitting there with popcorn, I think, is a great time to pivot to part 2 and what we can expect, how many bowls of popcorn we're going to be getting through, but we'll see you all in part 2. And then when it comes to what you can expect from the decisions that means, because one of the biggest defining features of 25 was the growing internal feud between the FSB and the military branch.
KGB is, well, it seems to be the winner, and I think it'll win. The KGB is flexing muscles, it's becoming stronger and stronger, and the biggest feud has been between, well, 2 feuds. First is with the army, like you said, and the second is with the President Chief of Staff Office. That Russia's Great Cardinal has been in charge of building a Russian political system.